7:47 p.m., one dazzling night in 2026. The enormous doors swing open. The lights inside the grand ballroom suddenly dim, and for one breathtaking second, hundreds of guests fall silent before the music explodes through the hall. Imagine this scene. Segun Arinze, now 60, standing beneath glittering chandeliers as camera flashes illuminate a celebration that could look like a $1 million wedding. Flowers stretch from the entrance to the stage, crystal decorations sparkle above elegantly dressed guests, and if some of Nollywood's biggest stars were to attend, familiar faces could be seen rising from their seats, applauding, laughing, and cheering as though they were witnessing one of the most glamorous weddings of the year. Then Julie Arinze appears. The applause grows louder. Someone begins dancing near the aisle, others join in, and within seconds the room seems to erupt with music, laughter, and celebration. Yet despite all the luxury surrounding him, Segun's eyes remain fixed on only one person. Julie. The woman he chose to build his life with. The woman he has publicly described as his partner and the mother of his children. If the couple were to mark their long marriage in 2026 with an extravagant renewal celebration at Segun's milestone age of 60, the most powerful part of that imagined night might not be the expensive decorations, celebrity guests, or spectacular lights. It would be the journey that brought them there. Because almost 2 decades earlier, there was no enormous ballroom, no sea of flowers, and no crowd waiting to dance. There was simply a man hoping that, after everything life had already taught him about love, he could finally meet the right woman. And then Julie entered his story. What followed was not a romance created beneath the lights of a luxury ceremony, but a relationship built through years of ordinary mornings, family responsibilities, private conversations, and moments the public never witnessed. Now imagine the music returning to that hypothetical 2026 celebration. Segun reaches for Julie's hand. The guests begin chanting and cheering. Julie laughs as he draws her toward the dance floor, and suddenly age seems irrelevant. At 60, he is surrounded by people celebrating not the beginning of an unfamiliar love, but the endurance of one that has already traveled through years of life. According to what has been publicly shared about their relationship, Julie became far more than simply the woman standing beside a famous Nollywood actor. She became part of the family story he continued building away from the cameras. And perhaps that is why an imagined $1 million wedding would carry such emotional weight. The diamonds could shine, the champagne glasses could rise, famous guests could dance until midnight, and photographers could chase the perfect picture. But none of it would explain the expression on Segun's face as he looked across the room at Julie. Because somewhere beneath the thunder of celebration would remain the memory of the man he once was, long before this imagined night, when there was only one question in his heart. Would he ever find the person he truly wanted to call his wife? At 7:47 p.m., the music grows louder. Julie steps closer. Segun smiles. Hundreds of hands rise into the air, and as the dance floor disappears beneath laughing guests, the camera slowly moves backward toward those enormous open doors, as if somewhere beyond them, nearly 20 years of their story are waiting to be told. 2007. Long before the imagined $1 million lights of 2026, before the flowers, the dancing, and the thunderous applause, Segun Arinze was facing a much quieter question. Would he ever find the right woman to call his wife? His first marriage had ended, years had passed without another marriage, and Segun later spoke about how confusing the search for the right partner had become. He had experienced relationships that could be described as good, bad, and complicated, enough emotional turns to make certainty feel increasingly difficult. Yet somewhere beneath that confusion remained one simple desire. He wanted a wife. According to accounts of how their relationship began, Segun eventually prayed about finding the right person, and then came a wedding that would quietly change the direction of his life. Segun and comedian Julius Agwu were reportedly serving as masters of ceremony that day. The room was busy, guests were talking, music filled the air, people moved between tables, and almost nobody could have known that something important was about to begin. There was no million-dollar stage waiting for Segun and Julie, no enormous spotlight following their movements, no crowd rising to celebrate them as a couple. There was only Segun looking across the gathering and noticing a woman named Julie. For a moment, she was simply another face among the wedding guests, but something made his attention return to her. Segun reportedly considered asking his assistant to get her contact details. It would have been easier. One small instruction and someone else could have made the introduction. But he changed his mind. Instead, Segun walked toward Julie himself. Imagine how ordinary the moment must have appeared to everyone else. A man crossing a crowded room, two strangers exchanging words, perhaps a smile, perhaps a little nervous laughter. Nobody stopped dancing. Nobody announced that a love story had begun. No camera necessarily understood the significance of what it was seeing. Yet that tiny decision, to walk over instead of sending someone else, opened a door. They spoke. Contact information was exchanged. Then came an invitation to dinner, another conversation, another opportunity to discover the person behind that first impression. For Segun, who had spent years wondering where the right woman might be, the answer had not arrived with fireworks. She had appeared in the middle of an ordinary celebration belonging to somebody else. That is the strange beauty of turning points. While the world keeps talking, laughing, and dancing, a person's entire future can quietly shift through an action so small that everyone nearby misses it. Years later, one could imagine Segun standing beside Julie at 60 beneath the spectacular lights of 2026, surrounded by cheering guests. But rewind the story far enough, and all that remains is the image of a crowded wedding in 2007, Julie somewhere across the room, and Segun taking those few unnoticed steps toward her. 2008. 1 year after that seemingly ordinary encounter, the story reached a decision far more serious than exchanging phone numbers or sharing dinner. Segun Arinze chose Julie. For a man who had already experienced the collapse of a marriage, saying yes again could carry a different weight. Someone who has never fallen may fear the unknown, but someone who has fallen already knows exactly how painful the ground can be. Segun knew that marriage could fail. He knew affection alone could not protect two people from every disagreement, disappointment, or difficult season. Yet after years of caution and uncertainty, he decided to begin again. There was no need for a million-dollar spectacle to make that decision meaningful. What mattered was that Julie became his wife, and the woman he had once noticed across a crowded wedding gradually became part of the center of his life. Julie was not simply a partner standing beside a Nollywood star at public events. She was also a lawyer and reportedly became an important legal advisor in his professional world. Their lives began to overlap in ways far deeper than photographs could capture. Then came family life, the sound of children, conversations moving from room to room, laughter breaking through ordinary evenings, responsibilities waiting every morning, and all those small routines that rarely appear beneath celebrity headlines. Marriage after the ceremony was no longer about beautiful clothes or applause. It was about waking up and choosing the same household again. It was about responsibilities, work, children, disagreements, celebrations, and the countless ordinary days between the dramatic moments. Year followed year. The man who had once wondered whether he would find the right person was no longer searching through a crowded room. Julie was there beside him as their family story continued to grow. And this is where the imagined grandeur of 2026 suddenly takes on another meaning. Suppose Segun and Julie, with Segun at the milestone age of 60, decided to mark their journey with an extraordinary celebration, a magnificent hall filled with flowers, elegant tables, music, dancing, famous Nollywood guests, and hundreds of voices cheering as they entered together. People might call it a million-dollar wedding. Cameras might focus on the decorations, the clothes, the jewelry, and every luxurious detail. But would any of those things actually be the most expensive part of the night? Or would the true value be something money could never purchase? The years between 2008 and 2026. Years of waking beneath the same roof, raising a family, carrying responsibilities and continuing forward together. Imagine Segun standing in that hypothetical ballroom as the music slows. Around him, guests are laughing and dancing, but for a few seconds he looks toward Julie and everything else seems to fade. Somewhere behind that image is the man from 2007 who was still searching, and somewhere ahead are all the years still unwritten. The lights continue sparkling above them, but one question quietly remains. If this journey were celebrated in 2026, what would truly make the night priceless? The fortune spent creating it, or the 18 years it took them to arrive there? 2013. 5 years had passed since Segun Arinze and Julie began their marriage, and the story was no longer about the excitement of meeting someone new. The pace had changed. Life had become quieter, fuller, more ordinary, and perhaps more meaningful. Around their 5th wedding anniversary, Segun publicly reflected on their marriage in terms of happiness, understanding, and love. Those words were simple, but 5 years of marriage can hide thousands of moments that no interview or photograph could ever contain. By then, Julie was no longer merely the woman Segun had approached at a wedding years earlier. She was part of the rhythm of his everyday life. As the years continued, Segun would publicly describe her with affectionate words such as friend, soulmate, and superwoman, language that suggested how many different roles one person could occupy within a marriage. But turn the camera toward Julie for a moment. Behind the familiar face of a Nollywood actor was another world the audience rarely saw. There were professional responsibilities, legal work, children, family decisions, schedules, ordinary mornings and evenings when celebrity mattered far less than what needed to be done at home. There may have been disagreements too, as there can be in any family, moments when two people saw the same situation differently and had to find their way forward. No scandal is necessary to make those years dramatic. Sometimes endurance itself is the story. Imagine an ordinary evening. No photographers outside, no red carpet, no expensive decorations, only voices inside the house, children laughing somewhere nearby, a phone ringing, unfinished work waiting on a table, and two adults trying to balance careers with family. These are the scenes that rarely become headlines, yet they are the scenes from which long marriages are built. And year after year, Julie's place in Segun's story seemed to become increasingly difficult to reduce to 3 words: Segun Arinze's wife. She was his partner, a mother within their family, a professional in her own right and, in Segun's affectionate descriptions, someone he regarded as a close companion through life. Now, allow the timeline to accelerate again. 5 years become 10. 10 become 15. Children grow older. Faces change. Careers evolve. Birthdays arrive faster. And suddenly the imagined lights of 2026 appear again on the horizon. The enormous ballroom returns, flowers climb toward the ceiling, music shakes the dance floor, and famous guests, if invited, could fill the room with applause and laughter. Yet none of that imagined luxury would mean very much without the quiet years that came first. The spectacular celebration would only be the visible surface. Underneath it would lie countless mornings, responsibilities, conversations, and ordinary family moments. And as the music rises again, imagine Julie standing for a second at the edge of that glittering dance floor, looking toward the man who once crossed a crowded room to meet her, while behind them stretches a history no camera could ever capture in a single frame. 2026. The lights return, but this time the image means something completely different. Imagine not a second first wedding, but an extraordinary renewal of vows, a celebration created to honor the years Segun Arinze and Julie Arinze have already shared. Segun enters his 60th year no longer as the uncertain man of 2007 who wondered whether he would ever find the right woman. Now picture him standing at the entrance of a magnificent ballroom, dressed elegantly as thousands of flowers stretch across the hall and long banquet tables disappear beneath candles, crystal, and shimmering decorations. Light reflects from hundreds of glasses. Then the drums begin. Nigerian rhythms rise through the room, faster and louder, until conversations stop and every face turns toward the entrance. Guests form two sides along the aisle. Laughter erupts. Younger guests begin dancing almost immediately, while older relatives and friends clap to the rhythm, smiling as the celebration gathers energy. And if friends, colleagues, and familiar faces from Nollywood were to appear at such an anniversary celebration, the moment Segun and Julie entered together would surely become the center of attention. Cameras would turn. Phones would rise. Applause would roll across the hall. Yet this imagined spectacle carries one crucial difference from an ordinary wedding. Segun and Julie would not be two people promising themselves to a future they had never experienced. They already know what waits after the music stops. They know what exists behind the finest clothes and the carefully arranged photographs. They have seen each other on ordinary mornings, during demanding work days, and throughout the responsibilities of raising a family. They have heard the laughter that never reached a microphone and lived through private moments no audience could applaud. That is what could make a vow renewal at 60 so powerful. When Segun looks at Julie across this imagined aisle, he is not looking at the woman he first noticed across a crowded wedding in 2007. He is looking at the woman whose face has remained within his story as the calendar turned from one year to the next. Then the drums suddenly accelerate. Segun reaches Julie. The crowd cheers. Someone shouts with joy, and the dance floor explodes into movement. Julie laughs as Segun takes her hand, and for several seconds the entire hall seems to move around them. Dresses turning, hands clapping, music pounding, and guests dancing beneath the lights. Perhaps people outside would focus on the cost and call it a $1 million wedding. They might count the flowers, examine the jewelry, or speculate about the guest list. But inside that room, the most striking detail would be impossible to purchase. These two people would not be saying "I do" because they had just discovered each other. They would be saying it after knowing what real life beside each other actually looks like. And as the music briefly softens, Segun and Julie remain in the center of the floor, surrounded by a celebration that seems enormous. While somewhere beneath the noise echoes a much quieter memory of the first time he walked across another wedding hall simply to ask for her contact information. Then the drums hit. Suddenly, the imagined ballroom of 2026 erupts. The Nigerian music surges louder, faster, almost demanding that everyone move. Segun Arinze turns toward Julie with a wide smile. She reaches out her hand, he takes it, and together they step into the center of a circle formed by cheering guests. One enormous shout rises from the room. Phones immediately go into the air. Friends begin moving their shoulders to the rhythm. Younger guests rush toward the dance floor. Older guests clap in time with the drums, and laughter cuts through the music from every direction. For these few minutes, nobody needs to talk about how much the flowers cost, how expensive the hall might be, or whether someone would call this a $1 million wedding. The people are the spectacle. Segun is 60, dancing beside the woman he first noticed at another wedding almost 2 decades earlier. And now the timeline begins flashing like photographs. 2007. Segun looks through a crowded room and sees Julie. One glance, a decision to walk toward her, a conversation that almost nobody around them notices. 2008. They become husband and wife, beginning a chapter whose real meaning could only be measured with time. 2020. Segun publicly celebrated Julie and thanked the woman who changed his life by saying, "Yes." Then 2026, if they chose this milestone year for an extraordinary renewal of vows, Segun would once again find himself standing in front of the very same woman. Back on the imagined dance floor, Julie laughs. Segun responds with another playful step, and the crowd explodes again. Someone behind them is filming everything. Friends are dancing in a circle. Hands clap above heads. The drums pound harder. Their children, if gathered there with the family, could be watching the two people whose decision years earlier created the home they know today. There are no tears needed here. This moment belongs to laughter, to movement, to the kind of happiness that makes people forget where their seats are because everyone wants to join the celebration. Segun turns, Julie follows, and another roar sweeps across the room. For a second, the famous actor disappears behind the image of something much simpler, a husband enjoying a dance with his wife. Then something changes. Segun looks directly at Julie. The music is still thunderous. Hundreds of hands may still be clapping. Phones remain raised and people continue dancing around them. But in the imagined frame, everything beyond the couple slowly loses focus. 2007 and 2026 seem to collapse into the same moment. The woman across the crowded room then, the woman holding his hand now. Segun smiles. Julie smiles back. And for just a few seconds, despite all the noise, all the lights and everyone surrounding them, the crowd seems to disappear. And then, almost without warning, the music fades. The pounding drums soften, the dancing slows, and the imagined ballroom of 2026 suddenly feels different. For the first time that night, forget the glittering decorations and ask a simpler question. If a celebration like this were described as a $1 million wedding, where would its real value actually be found? There is no need to invent a price tag. Flowers can be purchased, arranged beautifully and replaced, but eventually they fade. Stage lights can transform an ordinary room into something spectacular, but at the end of the night, someone switches them off. Famous guests, if they attended, would eventually say goodbye and leave. Expensive suits and elegant dresses would be folded away or returned to wardrobes. The music would stop. The glasses would be cleared from the tables. By morning, even the grandest ballroom would become quiet again. But there is one thing nobody can rent for a single evening. Nearly 2 decades of shared life. And suddenly the story races backward once more, to 2007. Segun was not asking for chandeliers. He was not praying for thousands of flowers, celebrity guests, or a dance floor filled with cameras. By his own later account, what he wanted was far more personal. He wanted to find the right woman, someone he could marry. After previous experiences had left him uncertain about relationships and marriage, that desire carried a different kind of weight. Then, at someone else's wedding, Julie appeared among the crowd. No dramatic announcement, no spotlight. Just a woman he noticed and a decision to approach her. One conversation became another. Dinner followed. In 2008, they married. Years accumulated quietly. Their family grew. Julie became not simply a name beside Segun's, but a companion he would publicly celebrate with words of affection and gratitude. And that is where the entire meaning of this imagined super wedding begins to turn upside down. At the beginning, the audience may have been looking toward 2026, expecting luxury, the hall, the flowers, the celebrity faces, the dancing, perhaps even wondering how much such a spectacular night could cost. But now the camera moves away from all of it. It finds Segun again, 60 years old, Julie beside him, the same woman whose contact information he once had to gather the courage to ask for. Perhaps the true story was never about whether they could create the most extravagant celebration of the year. Perhaps it was about a man who once did not know whether he would ever find the person he was searching for. And then, in the middle of a crowded wedding that belonged to somebody else, he found Julie. The imagined ballroom grows quieter. One by one, the lights begin to dim while Segun and Julie remain together at the center of the floor. 11:56 p.m. in the imagined setting of one extraordinary night in 2026. The music has almost disappeared. The Nigerian drums that shook the ballroom only hours earlier have faded into a distant melody, and the final dancers slowly leave the floor. One by one, guests walk toward the enormous doors. A few turn around for one last wave. Someone laughs in the corridor. Another guest lifts a hand toward Segun and Julie before disappearing outside. Then the doors begin to close, and suddenly the room that had seemed impossibly alive feels enormous and quiet. Glasses remain on the long tables. A few flower petals lie scattered across the floor. Chairs have been pulled away from their perfect positions, silent evidence of the celebration that has just taken place. There is no longer a wall of applause. No crowd is chanting. No circle of friends is dancing around Segun and Julie. The imagined camera moves slowly through the nearly empty ballroom, passing the flowers, the abandoned glasses, and the dance floor where hundreds of footsteps seem to collide only moments earlier. Then it stops. Two chairs are positioned close together. Segun and Julie are sitting there. No spotlight surrounds them now. At 60, Segun is simply beside the woman he once noticed across another crowded wedding almost 2 decades earlier. Think about the distance between those two images. 2007. A man attends a wedding, looks through a room filled with people and sees Julie. He thinks about sending someone else to ask for her contact information, but eventually walks toward her himself. One small decision, one conversation, one dinner invitation, then 2008. Marriage, children, work, responsibilities, anniversaries, ordinary mornings, laughter, years passing almost unnoticed until suddenly those years can be counted in decades. And now, in this hypothetical scene in 2026, the magnificent celebration is ending exactly as every celebration eventually must. Julie turns towards Segun and says something the camera cannot hear. Segun laughs. Not the public laugh of a performer standing before an audience, but a small, relaxed laugh between two people sitting beside each other after everyone else has begun to leave. Outside, the final car slowly pulls away. Its headlights sweep briefly across the entrance before disappearing into the night. Inside, a member of staff begins switching off the lights, one row at a time. A section of the ceiling falls into darkness. Then another. The flowers lose their sparkle. The crystal glasses stop reflecting the chandeliers. The enormous $1,000,000 room gradually becomes just an empty hall again, but two chairs remain close together. One more row of lights goes dark. Julie is still there. Segun is still beside her. Another switch clicks, leaving only a small pool of light around them. Nearly 2 decades separate the crowded wedding where Segun first saw Julie from this imagined night at 60, yet somehow the picture has become simpler rather than larger. No famous guests, no dancing crowd, no roaring music, only the man who once hoped he would find the right person sitting beside the woman he chose. The camera slowly retreats toward the doors. Segun says something. Julie smiles. The last light above the dance floor begins to fade, and in the very place where the imagined celebration has ended, the story of how Segun found the right person still seems to be waiting for its final scene.